What's up, everybody? Welcome back to Off the Bench. I'm Brandon Carney alongside Pat Gustafson. Pat, I don't know how this happened. We have football on Thursday?
I have football.
I mean, like, camp feels like it snuck up out of nowhere, and then you've got a game, the fucking stupid-ass Hall of Fame game this Thursday. You've got Jets, you've got Browns. We're going to get a nice, healthy, heaping dose of Kellen Mond versus Zach Wilson.
Yeah.
Oh, baby. I will say one thing I'm unironically excited about is Dorian Thompson-Robinson. I'm kind of excited to see him. He's a little electric in college.
Stefanski said he was probably going to play most of the second half, so...
Yeah, I mean, he's a fun player. Ran quite a bit in college at UCLA, 12 rushing touchdowns last season, 9 the season before, so the guy knows how to move up and down the football field. And look, a situation like the Hall of Fame game, you would assume he has plenty of opportunity to do whatever the hell he wants. But, Pat, as we start the recording of this podcast, the MLB trade deadline is coming down. And look, this isn't something we're going to spend much time on. It is over. It is 4:02 here Eastern time.
Trades will still trickle in.
Or, sorry, 6:02 Eastern time. It's 4:02 here in the Mountain Time. But, yeah, Yankees, Pat, I see your Yankee shirt right there. How are you feeling about the New York Yankees right now?
I couldn't feel worse. Like, going into this day, I said they either need to go for it, which would have been pointless, but at least say, like, hey, we're going for it, or sell whatever pieces they have, which they have none to begin with. They have Harrison Bader. They have Gleyber Torres. I guess you could have traded, like, Wandy Peralta, but that's the problem, that they couldn't, like, they did this a number of years ago when they traded Aroldis Chapman and Andrew Miller at the last second. Right. That's what got them Gleyber Torres, but they didn't have those guys that they could do that this year, so they were just in eternal purgatory, and that's just what they did, was they stayed in purgatory. They traded for Keenan Middleton from the White Sox, who, granted, has come out of nowhere this year and will be a decent piece in an already really good bullpen, but it's not a good time.
All they got.
It's not a good time to be. Conceivably, there, something could still come through that was in before 4 o'clock. But yeah, I'm not a fan of what they did, or more so what they didn't do.
Folks, there is a reason that despite me being a Yankees fan, you have not heard me talk about them basically at all through the entirety of baseball season. This season has been a slog to get through. Aaron Judge has been hurt for half of it. This team has been painfully underwhelming. Every player on the roster pretty much has performed below expectations, other than maybe Garrett Cole and some of the relief pitchers. But yeah, football. Let's do football instead, Pat. How's that sound? That sound good?
Yeah, I'm good. I'm good with that. Maybe for just the rest of time.
For the rest of forever, at least until Cashman's gone, or Hal, or both. But Pat, the football drama started basically as soon as training camp opened. So last week we talked about Kadarius Toney getting injured and needing surgery. Then, it developed throughout the course of the week. Lot more injuries. So Joe Burrow went down with a very scary injury to his calf. Turns out it wasn't anything major. Seems like he's just going to miss the rest of the preseason. Still not something you want to see, and hopefully doesn't linger into the season. But look, avoided worst case scenario. There was concern that it was an Achilles injury. Not the case, thankfully.
Calves are scary.
Calves are scary. Yeah, it can be an indication of an Achilles, and luckily this time it was not. Garrett Wilson left practice early, one of the breakout candidates of the season, especially for fantasy football. He ended up being okay as well. He's going to miss a few days and be back here pretty soon. And then I'm missing Jalen Ramsey is now going to be. He's going to be out until December. So there's been a lot of hard hitting injuries here over the first few days. Oh, dude, Tim Patrick being the latest of these injuries. That one happened yesterday. Tore his ACL almost a year ago to the day. I believe it was like 3 days off, and now tears his Achilles. Just a sad situation. Like, Tim Patrick's
he looked
a guy
pretty good, and he was
playing
pretty well too. A couple of years ago at this point.
I know. Yeah, he was a guy that you weren't going to see a ton of statistical production from him necessarily, because they've got Jerry Jeudy, they've got Cortland Sutton, they've even got Marvin Mims drafted. But Tim Patrick is a guy.
Stock's going up.
Tim Patrick is a guy that by all accounts is loved on that team and has a lot of, I think, untapped potential. Unfortunately, some of that potential is probably dwindling as the injuries keep piling up, but at full strength, he was a guy who I personally wanted to see get a much larger sample size of production. So it's sad to see this happen to him, but hopefully he can work his way back from this one too. It's got to be so tough mentally, man. Not even physically. Just...
I cannot fathom going through like a year plus of rehab on an ACL to only get a worse injury. Like, I mean, ACLs, you see, it takes a little bit to bounce back, but some guys, especially you've seen it in basketball too, some guys never bounce back from an Achilles.
Yeah.
Like, I think you'd ask 100 athletes, I'd say 99 of them would say, maybe even 100 would say that they would rather tear their ACL than rupture their Achilles.
Yeah, it kills your explosiveness. Like it's so difficult to come back from. So we hope for the best for Tim Patrick. I'm out here in Broncos country, so obviously I'm hoping for the best for him, but we will see what happens. I don't know, this time next year, I guess. But Pat, I think the biggest headline now as camp starts. Look, it feels like we went immediately from Saquon Barkley drama. He is the running back that is dominating all the headlines.
That was nothing.
Saquon, signed his little manufactured fake franchise tag, and now Jonathan Taylor has taken all of that spotlight and then some with this incredibly public beef with the Colts and Jim Irsay.
And I was going to say, he's not even the star of this beef. The star of this beef is far and away Jim Irsay.
Yeah. Yeah, no, he's doing some weird stuff in how this situation is being handled. So go ahead.
The memes have just been remarkable, where it's like Jonathan Taylor requested a trade, Jim Irsay, what if I fucking die? Like, like not only to think that, like that's one of the first things you think, but you tweet that, you put that into existence. I was like gobsmacked, but granted, based on his history, alleged history, this seems in line. Like I actually retweeted this again. It was a tweet of him from like 2010. He's like, I know this is a sin and naughty, but I love Sarah Palin's feet.
Oh my God.
It's like Jim. It's like Jim. So this guy's just been a fucking menace for how fucking, let's see. I know it's a sin, but I have a crush on Sarah Palin's feet. ...
Okay, so this is a man that you want making major headlines and decisions for your football team. That much is clear. Just to sum up this situation for anybody that doesn't know. So Jonathan Taylor is in the final year of his rookie contract. There's no fifth-year option available. I'm sure a lot of you guys have heard that for rookie contracts. Jonathan Taylor, if you'll recall, was not picked in the first round. That's why there is no such fifth-year option available.
I forgot about that.
Yeah, I didn't realize it either, to be honest, until I looked up his contract, and then I was like, oh yeah, like the only first-round running back selected in that draft was Clyde Edwards-Helaire. So Jonathan Taylor does not have that fifth-year option. Clyde's was declined, by the way, unsurprisingly. So at last year of his rookie deal, that means we're headed for either free agency next season or the dreaded franchise tag again. And basically, Taylor was offended that he wasn't even offered an extension, which makes sense. I mean, I don't know if lowballing the guy is the answer either, but like this dude has been remarkably productive for you in his first 2 years on the team. Banged up last year, of course, but that'll happen. That's what happens to the running back position. But remarkably productive for you for 2 years, and you're not even going to do him the justice of offering an extension before the final year of his rookie deal. I understand it. So he requested a trade. Colts said no. Jim Irsay basically said, we're not trading Jonathan, end of discussion, not now and not in October. Then we had that, notorious quote of, if I die tonight and Jonathan Taylor is out of the league, no one's going to miss us. The league goes on. We know that. The National Football League rolls on. It doesn't matter who comes and who goes, and it's a privilege to be a part of it. Okay,
like my man took this from like a 1 to a 10 just for no good reason. I respect the hell out of it. That is some like that is peak tweeting right there. Like I think a lot of us wish that we could just rip off tweets like that.
This was basically, hey Jim, I'd like to be paid more and for you to show that you value me. And Jim's like, we're on a big floating rock in space and nothing matters, dick.
What's that other meme where it's like running back? It's like the enemy sleeps with thy. Like it's like tweets from each position.
Yeah. For wide receivers, it was like the enemy speaks kindly and carries a knife.
Like that's some wide receiver ass shit there.
Yeah. So I don't know if Jim Irsay was a wide receiver in a previous life, but it was some weird shit. And so, look, there's then public beef between Taylor and Irsay. Taylor says, I want to be traded. Irsay says, fuck you, basically. And then you've got the Colts threatening to place Jonathan Taylor on the NFI list with back pain. And then Jonathan Taylor tweets saying he never had back pain. The non-football injury list implies, by its name, obviously, that it's an injury you suffered away from the team, away from practices, nothing team sanctioned. And, if you are to suffer an injury under those circumstances, then the team doesn't have to pay you because, in theory, you were being reckless. Obviously, you can also just be unlucky, but that's the thinking, is that they don't have to pay you under those situations. So they're trying to get out of paying Jonathan Taylor now, and Taylor's saying, I never had back pain.
I'm going to call cap. on Jonathan Taylor.
I am
honestly.
as well.
Like I saw, I tweeted this as well. I saw a video. It was like a video of him at practice. Like I have severe back problems. Like I have chronic back problems, and that man was walking on the field the way I walk every day. Like he did not look well. Like there is that is a man with back problems, with a back problem. You don't just walk like that and say like, oh, I'm completely fine. Like I get he wants to downplay it and say like, oh, it was never this big of a problem, but like that is not a man with zero back pain.
Well, and this is the thing, too, is Ian Rappaport went on the Pat McAfee show today and was talking about it, and basically the only way they could put him on the NFI list would be if Taylor didn't previously disclose the back injury, I guess, in a reasonable amount of time. And so basically they're accusing him of lying about it. And they're like, you have back pain, we can tell, and you did it on your own time, so we don't have to pay you for that. And I think Taylor denying it is probably just trying to save face, trying to save his contract, because as I have noted here, being on the NFI list, let's say, worst case scenario, he spends the entire season on the NFI list. Maybe he needs surgery for this back situation he's got going on here. His contract would not toll. So he would be under contract with the Colts again next year, this year,
and
essentially.
then get franchise
would
tagged
not have
the
happened.
year after that.
Then get tagged, and then get tagged again, assuming he's healthy at that point. So Pat, all of this to say, what the hell do we do with this for fantasy football? Because this is a guy who is, by all accounts, a top 10 running back pick. I mean, no matter where you look, easily.
Even in non-PPR rankings, ESPN last week, I believe in ESPN non-PPR ADP, he's 3. Like he was going as the 3rd highest player in non-PPR drafts. And I mean, granted, you look at it from a health perspective. First of all, like, is this guy healthy? Like you don't want a guy out there hobbling around as your your first pick, your running back. And then from the whole perspective of the situation here, is he going to hold out? Is he going to be unhappy? Is he going to be on the NFI? Like, granted, it's good that it's August 1st today. Most leagues, any good league, should be at least 4 weeks to a month from drafting. So there's going to be a lot more clarity. But right now, if I had to draft, I'm staying away from him in the early rounds just because of this uncertainty.
Yeah, and it's tough for me, Pat, because as you know, I took my draft position in our league with the idea of, there's a certain number of running backs that I'm comfortable with going before my pick so that I can guarantee I get one I like. Jonathan Taylor was factored into the running backs that I like. And so I don't think, I don't know what to do here, Pat, because I'm really hoping that that this all gets sorted out. But now you look into this and you go into next year where, like, even if things get sorted out and he's on the field week 1, it's just bad vibes, Like I don't know how you feel good about drafting Jonathan Taylor. And by the way, we were dealing with a slight echo issue, Pat. I think you solved it. Good job. So we were offlining about me echoing through Pat's mic. But Jonathan Taylor has there's a bad cloud surrounding him now, and it's like, even if he plays, is this weird holdout thing gonna pop up again mid-season? Is there gonna be a lying about injuries type of situation here where I don't know how you trust the guy, and he's not a guy anymore that I'm comfortable spending, say, the 7th overall pick on in a non-PPR league where running backs are very valuable. I think if he falls to, the 2nd round now because of this, then sure. But the nice thing is we will get more of a resolution on this before draft day. We have to, right? Like, I don't think these two sides can be at a stalemate for quite that long. Either he'll be put on the NFI list officially, or, he'll stay on the PUP and miss 6 weeks. We don't know what it is, but there's going to be some sort of answer. But it definitely does take a workhorse running back, in a good coaching system, probably out of the 1st round. So it does shake up the 1st round a little bit in one way or another. Oh, and by the way, primary backup Zach Moss broke his arm. So this Colts backfield just becomes incredibly gross. Zach Moss was the only maybe viable backup
I'll
there?
say in the last couple of years, Deion Jackson has had some decent games when he's been given the full workload. A very good pass-catching back as well, but I'm not ideal. And I mean, again, we're going to talk about some veteran running back, free agent running back still, but could this put them in, even with Zach Moss being out, this could put them in the market for a guy like Kareem Hunt, Ezekiel Elliott, Leonard Fournette, I forgot him, Dalvin Cook even, probably not Dalvin Cook, but maybe this could throw them in the conversation. And I honestly, like, this just show how nothing new this is. I saw a really good, it was like a Twitter conversation between Mike Florio, Pro Football Talk, and Tony Dungy. And it was basically about how in 06, like, the Colts did not re-sign Edgerrin James. Like, the Colts worked Edgerrin James and then just let him walk. But then they drafted Joseph Adai, and then they got Dominic Rhodes, and they won the Super Bowl. So it just goes to show for almost 20 years now that running backs have not really been that valuable. And Tony Dungy just basically said, like, it's not a spit 'em up, chew 'em up, spit 'em out kind of deal. It's basically economics. Like, we could have paid Edgerrin James a ton of money, but instead we used that to get Dwight Freeney back and Dallas Clark back, and it was still just as productive. So this has been a problem. Well, not a problem, but just kind of a tactic teams used for almost 2 decades now. And I think it's more so just only coming to the limelight now because these guys are just being more outspoken about it. But I've said this 3 weeks in a row. There is just no plausible solution within the realms of the current CBA right now.
Yeah, so here's what I think is weird about this particular situation, though, is like, look, I don't blame the Colts for, let's say, not wanting to extend Jonathan Taylor. That's their choice. You know, running backs are not entitled to extensions or whatever, like if the team wants to move on. If that's their plan, though, why is Jim Irsay outright saying, no, we're not trading the guy? In his walk year, in a year where you have nothing to lose, like the Colts aren't doing anything this year. The Colts are going to be starting either a rookie Anthony Richardson the entire year or half Gardner Minshew, half Anthony Richardson. This is not a team that's built to compete. Trade Jonathan Taylor, get assets back. He's still viewed as one of the top running backs in the league, unless there's something that the public doesn't know and that the league knows, you know, this guy is damaged goods and this back thing is more serious than we think it is weird. It feels like he's denying a trade request out of spite. And that part I don't get. It seems like he's just kind of being a dick.
But at the same time, if I'm Jim Irsay, though, like you said, feasibly I can control him for 3 more years. They've got one of them under contract and then 2 years of the franchise tag. So I guess he might be looking from the perspective of like, why would I trade him when maybe I can mend the fence and still have this guy for 3 years and beyond? I don't know how practical that is, but yeah, from what we've seen from Jim Irsay in terms of just his character, not to say that he has character problems, but you know, literally the dude's a character. The dude's a cartoon character.
100%.
That he very well could be doing that out of spite.
Yeah, I'm not sure where this goes, Pat. I think it came out of nowhere. It felt like, I mean, if you were looking for it, there were seeds planted about this kind of throughout the offseason of Jonathan Taylor. He had like an offhanded comment about, you know, I see why running backs are starting to demand trades. That was like months ago. And then the whole running back as a whole issue popped up. And, you know, then Jonathan Taylor just kind of became the face of it for one way or another. But yeah, I don't know. I'm sad. Jonathan Taylor was a guy that I remember texting my buddy Gary, you know, 2 weeks ago. I was like, I'm all in on JT. Like, if he's there at my pick, I will take him. I'm all in. I'm all out right now, as the Colts also seem to be. So that's, you know, it's a weird situation. We'll see what the injury thing ends up being, if anything. But, Pat, one backfield where the injury thing is a thing is the Seattle Seahawks. So we've talked about Kenneth Walker and Zach Charbonnet, what's going to happen with this backfield, how we're approaching and all this stuff. How about this, Pat? How about we get neither, because they're both hurt. So neither player has, I believe, even participated in camp yet because they basically entered it with injuries. Kenneth Walker with a groin injury, Zach Charbonnet with a shoulder injury. Here are some quotes from Pete Carroll, who is notoriously optimistic on injuries, which is why these kind of raised some red flags that these were less optimistic.
That was my same thought when I saw that quote.
It is early in camp, so look, if he says somebody's going to be out a while, maybe that's just a while in the context of training camp, and it doesn't necessarily mean, you know, weeks into the season. But here's what he said about Walker. He said he doesn't feel bad. It's not a terrible injury. We just don't want to aggravate it now and have it be something that lingers through camp. That was after he said he would be out, quote, a while. But of course, the a while part is going to be what circulates, and it is what circulated. And then on Zach Charbonnet, Zach's got a little shoulder thing that we're checking out right now. And then on both of them, Pete Carroll said, we'd love to have these guys out here, but they're not ready to do anything. So I think, Pat, and you can, you know, agree or disagree with how I'm approaching this right now. Obviously, we have to watch these injuries and see what develops from them. But let's assume both guys are out there week 1. As long as they're out there with reportedly full health, this kind of raises my expectation for Walker a little and completely ruins Charbonnet. Charbonnet, as a rookie, needs these reps to acclimate himself to this offense. I know we talked about how running back is the easiest adjustment to the NFL, but that is assuming you have a full camp and full preseason to get, you know, some reps at the very least. I think if Kenneth Walker doesn't play at all in camp or the preseason and just kind of rehabs this and gets back to normal, whatever the severity of it is, if he's out there week 1, I will feel very good about starting Kenneth Walker if his only competition, quote unquote, is Zach Charbonnet, who missed an entire training camp and preseason. At the very least, I wouldn't expect Charbonnet to be a factor until a month into the
Well, that's what I was going to say. If anything, like we've seen with running backs in the past, it takes a little while for them to get fully incorporated, let alone without missing it. So, yeah, I think if
Walker did it last year.
If anything, it would give Walker yeah, exactly. Obviously, he was ramping up, and then it took the Penny injury for him to truly get in there. But, if we are worried about Charbonnet emerging, this at the very least could delay that for 3 or 4 weeks, which is enough. We're talking 3-4 weeks with we're talking 8 games of Kenneth Walker kind of being the top dog. That's a lot. That's a lot. And I've kind of said it multiple times that I'm not super scared of Zach Charbonnet and stealing that much from him. He's going to steal a lot in terms of the passing game. Walker's not a great pass catching back, but Walker's still going to be there between the tackles in the red zone and the 10 zone at the goal line in an offense that loves to run the ball. So, but then the question is so what if, let's look on the other side. What if both of these guys are out? What the hell? They've got DJ Dallas, who is really only a pass-catching back. Mm-hmm. And then a man named Kenny McIntosh from Georgia. He was a 7th-round pick this year. It seems like they would have to bring in someone else.
You would think, and again, it's weird analyzing this right now because we have no clue as to the severity of either injury. We don't know if these guys are, just going to be out there week 1 and healthy and happy, or if it's going to be until week 6 or 7 that we have a fully healthy 1-2 punch in this backfield. And we are expecting this 1-2 punch to be very, very difficult to, kind of split hairs and figure out how each player, what kind of value each player was going to have this year. And now it's like, I don't even know where to begin. So you're right. I think they would have to bring somebody in. If as the backfield stands right now, I mean, I'm not drafting DJ Dallas. I don't know about you. I will cop to, I have started DJ Dallas in the past. This is just due to the down badness that can happen over the course of a fantasy football season. I have been forced to start DJ Dallas. I actually have been forced to choose between DJ Dallas and Travis Homer. I think I settled on Dallas.
Last year I had the Travis Homer, Tony Jones debate going, and I chose correctly. I chose Travis Homer correctly.
At least you chose correctly. Hey, that's good enough.
But I saw, again, another just memes are great. Fantasy football memes are great. It's like the guys sitting in the church holding guns to each other, and it's like Kenny McIntosh, DJ Dallas, Dalvin Cook, and then the sniper is Marshawn Lynch.
Yeah, we're gonna get Marshawn Lynch out of retirement to hold this backfield together again. Yeah,
for the 3rd time.
Yeah, I think, there's a lot of ways that this can go, Pat. It's really just how things develop over the next few weeks, because I could see a world where I'm more in on Kenneth Walker than ever. I could see a world where I'm kind of out on this backfield entirely, because if there's injury concerns, look, there's also the overarching kind of, storm cloud of, is Geno Smith going to be as good as he was last year?
Yeah.
And is this offense going to be as good as it was last year? And is it going to support can it even support 2 running backs? Like, we're thinking Charbonnet could at least have flex value at some point, and Kenneth Walker's a guy who's going to rely on touchdowns for a lot of his production. If he doesn't have those touchdown opportunities, then we're looking at a dicey situation. So you throw injuries into that mix, and then I really don't know. So Kenneth Walker for now is Kenneth Limper, and I just don't know that I'm going to be interested unless we get some I was hoping I could slide that one by you. I don't know if I'm going to be interested unless we get some really good news here over the next couple of weeks. But look, again, Pete Carroll was vague, and we just got to stay on the lookout for updates. But Pat, you mentioned some of those veteran running backs and potentially being answers here in Seattle. These veteran running backs are getting some visits. They're getting out on the town. We'll talk about one guy who's not getting out on the town for some reason. But Dalvin Cook visits the Jets, walks out of there with no deal. Kind of had everybody pressing the panic button on Breece Hall. And then you've got Ezekiel Elliott visiting the New England Patriots. I'll say this. The Patriots are going to add a running back.
Yes,
they are clearly in the market hardcore.
Which sucks.
It does suck because they worked out Leonard Fournette about a week and a half ago. Now they're working out Ezekiel Elliott, and these are both guys that are going to be, goal line pests for a guy like Ramondre Stevenson. And I was already concerned, and I still remain somewhat concerned about Ty Montgomery dampening, the receiving ceiling for Ramondre Stevenson. It's not going to be, look, Ty Montgomery is not catching 50 passes this year, but it's just a case where Ramondre, all the passes he caught last year were a direct result of injuries to the backfield. So if the Patriots come into this year with a healthy backfield, I just don't see them earmarking Ramondre for the amount of receptions he had last year. Combine that with they're looking for a goal line vulture, basically. They've got a help wanted score touchdown sign outside the fucking stadium. Zeke would be a problem.
For Ramondre
Pat,
Stevenson.
Zeke, I think, would have standalone flex value at least in non-PPR leagues.
He would at least be on the radar, I think.
Right.
I don't know if I'd go that far, but definitely enough where, especially non-PPR leagues, when he's going to score touchdowns, I don't think I'd be as scared as Fournette. Also because Fournette's proven to be a pretty decent pass catcher. He could kind of do a little bit of both, but at the end of the day, touchdowns reign supreme, and I don't know. I've been seeing Ramondre being so undervalued, or at least in my opinion, and some of these an Underdog and an ESPN and things like that, and it's just and I think it just might have been the uneasiness, the fact that this guy has never carried a full workload. Even in college, he never really carried a full workload. So maybe Belichick is just concerned that, wants a fallback. But when was the last time the Patriots had a bell cow running back? Corey Dillon?
It's rare. I mean, look, LeGarrette Blount had that 17 touchdown season, and Stephen Ridley back in the day had a bunch of carries, but those
but they still
situations,
Shane Vereen still existed then.
Right.
There's
Danny Woodhead, I think, was around
somebody.
when Blount was. Yeah. I mean, look, if Ramondre Stevenson scored 17 touchdowns, I don't think we'd give a shit if there was a passing down back mixed in, but that's not his skill set either. Ramondre Stevenson was not an overly successful player on the goal line last year. So granted, he didn't have as many opportunities as he might have this year with a hopefully just better offense overall. But look, this team, Patriots, are obviously looking for another name to add to this backfield. And again, hopefully an answer that we'll have before, Labor Day weekend, the most popular draft weekend of the year.
Oh, we have to.
Yeah. So hopefully they'll, have signed somebody by then or not signed somebody. I mean, I don't think they're likely to sign somebody, say, after week 1 if they're not going to sign him before week 1 unless there was an injury. So, look, Ramondre Stevenson's value is very much up in the air depending what happens here with Ezekiel Elliott or Leonard Fournette. But it does make me uneasy that they want somebody. They're not saying, Ramondre, you're getting all the touches. And there's even some talk about Pierre Strong. So there's going to be some competition here for Ramondre Stevenson. I'm not sure how I feel about his upside, honestly. I've kind of, as a Patriots guy, I've been a uncharacteristic downer on Ramondre Stevenson's fantasy value just because I've seen this backfield so many times and I've seen how it plays out. I don't want people to fall in love with all the points he put up last year because he was the only guy left standing. Yes, he was the most talented guy probably from the jump, but he was the last guy left.
And if for whatever reason they don't bring someone in, I'm still on that train where I'm not worried about Ty Montgomery. I'm not worried about Pierre Strong or Kevin Harris if he's still there, whatever. But
I'm good on Kevin Harris as well.
But that's what I'm saying. But if they were to bring in someone else, that is concerning. And also, you also mentioned Dalvin Cook. I think it's almost a foregone conclusion that I do think he's going to end up in New York. At this point, I would be shocked if he didn't. And I don't think that's more so a guy to cut into Breece Hall. I just think Breece Hall may not be ready to start the year.
Yeah, it's a distinct possibility. And I think you add in, if you add in Dalvin Cook and he's going to be there when Breece Hall does come back, it makes me completely out on Breece Hall. I mean,
at least at his current ADP, which is falling.
Yeah. So, I mean, Breece Hall, if we were doing this last week, I want to say he was probably a late second, early third kind of guy in mock drafts. Now he's going to be probably taking a tumble, especially if Dalvin Cook actually does sign. But yeah, I don't think it's a very good sign for Breece, but it could also just be the Jets being conservative. At the very least, we know it's not a good fantasy sign for Breece Hall because Dalvin Cook is going to eat into that workload whenever Breece Hall, steps on the field, whether it's week 1 or a few weeks in. Dalvin Cook definitely kills the upside of Breece Hall, to be honest. Pat, what about Kareem Hunt? What's going on here? Because I keep seeing, Zeke's visiting these teams. Zeke visited, I don't even think it was official, but he visited the Bengals, earlier in the offseason. And Leonard Fournette's getting visits, and Dalvin Cook's making... Kareem Hunt, I feel like, has maybe the second most juice out of these free agents behind Dalvin Cook, and yet is just not getting any visits. And I'm so confused because he's also the guy that fills... the most specific role out of guys like Dalvin and Zeke. Yes, Zeke, good goal line back, whatever. Dalvin can do a little bit of everything, even if he's, maybe less efficient than he once was. Kareem Hunt is the pass-catching back. If you need a pass-catching back, you need a change of pace back to mix things up, he's your guy. And yes, his efficiency dipped last year as well, but I find it strange that he hasn't even been brought in on visits. So I don't know.
I
I'm
wonder,
about to put his face
is
on
he
the side
like
of the milk carton.
even like looking for? I mean, the guy's 27. It's not like he's in the twilight and going to retire. Well, I think maybe this is a case of he's just waiting for an opportunity to come up, like maybe like one in Seattle or like one in Indianapolis, or knock on wood, there's probably going to be more. There's probably going to be more injuries, whether not severe or severe. Hopefully not, but there always seems to be an opportunity popping up. So, but he's definitely. I agree. I think he's the second best of those guys, and he's definitely the best pass catcher of this group of four by a lot, I think. So yeah, I'm a little surprised, but I think if I had to guess, it would just be that he's kind of just chilling. He's kind of just waiting around for his time.
Yeah, it's just I was surprised to I keep seeing all these names popping up, and he's just one that I have not seen, and I think he was widely viewed as the most talented running back free agent until Dalvin Cook got released. So I don't know, weird one, but we'll see if he pops up pretty soon. And Pat, you noted here that the Cowboys are unlikely to bring back Zeke, so that is important to note because Ronald Jones suspended for the first 2 games of the year, and they may be lacking a little bit of depth, but they're not going to bring in Zeke, and I can't say I blame him. I mean, look, it was a weird little kind of divorce they had, and Zeke is probably just ready to move on to something different here. But Rojo, I mean, just kind of making headlines again for all the wrong reasons.
Being bad at football.
Yeah,
but
he's a
honestly,
guy I was so optimistic for back in the day, too.
I don't think Zeke would hurt Tony Pollard a ton because
No.
Because look at what Tony Pollard did last year with Zeke in a pretty healthy role last year. Zeke, obviously, if they get Zeke, they're going to give him maybe $2 million. Like.
Yeah,
they're not going to feel as obligated to give him the workload they did. Obviously, he's going to take some touchdowns, which are huge, but I'm not worried about. Even if they bring in someone else, there's not a lot of situations where I am super worried about Tony Pollard.
No, and Tony Pollard, full disclosure, Pat, is kind of my emergency option in our draft. If all things go to shit by the time I pick it, I pick it 7th overall, if all things go to shit, because you know me, I don't want Derrick Henry, and so if all these other running backs are gone, I'm not going to not take a back, because I could go Kelsey or I could go Chase or something, and yes, that's the better overall value at my first pick, but then my second pick's going to roll around, and if Pollard's not still there, what am I looking at? I mean, I'm looking at, I guess, Travis Etienne, RB1, and I mean, some people might be okay with that. I'm personally not super comfortable with it. So I don't know. I took the 7th pick with the plan of getting a running back. So let's just, fingers crossed. Derrick Henry is such a big name that I'm hoping somebody bites. I'm hoping our boy Mike bites at number 6 at the very least, and lets somebody.
Mike, if you're listening, you're not. Do it.
Mike, I will kill you. So that's basically where I'm at with that. Okay. Pat, with training camp comes plenty of training camp hype. You've got clips popping up all over the place. You've got guys falling in love with players who are, barely going to see a snap on the football field this year. But I've picked out a few guys who I've seen a lot of hype from and who are going to have, either significant or reasonably significant workloads this season. So I wanted to just kind of talk about these guys and say, are we buying the hype on them? So number 1, Calvin Ridley. He was kind of the first camp clip that popped up that went viral. It was a clip of Zay Jones running a route and it looked fine. And then it was Calvin Ridley running it at what looked like 2x speed. And it was like, well, I guess Calvin Ridley's fine. So, then there's clips of him making some of these acrobatic catches. And it's answering. The one thing it can answer, I think, is how much rust is there. And it doesn't seem like much, if any, at least in terms of speed.
He's probably done a lot to stay in shape. Because granted, he wasn't injured, physically injured in these last 2 years where he hasn't played football. So I'd imagine the guy's got to have at least been working out on the side.
Exactly. So, I mean, look, it'll be much different once pads go on, but I don't really expect to see anything different. I mean, it'll be a different feel, but I feel like I'm going to see some of the same result. Pat, this was a guy that when we talked about this division in our divisional previews, that we were both kind of like, look, guy hasn't played football in basically 2 years. We're kind of out on him. I think I've turned a corner on Calvin Ridley. So how about you?
I was going to say I'm definitely buying into the hype a bit because I've started to think more favorably about him. I think the ADP is a bit steep, but I think that could just be a case of like underdog best ball kind of deal. Like I think in like redraft leagues, I don't think he's probably going to be going quite as high. But we talked about this before we got on, was that I just want as many pieces of this Jacksonville offense as possible. With Trevor Lawrence, with Christian Kirk. I mean, I still love Christian Kirk. I said when we talked about the AFC South that I like Christian Kirk better than Calvin Ridley, and I still do, definitely based on the value. And Christian Kirk was also my first pick in the undervalued draft. I think we just saw such a strong rapport with Trevor Lawrence and Christian Kirk. But who's to say there's not room for Calvin Ridley to get something? Because after those two, there's Zay Jones, who's like the epitome of mid, I think. Like, he's going to have huge games. He's going to have games where you're not even sure he's on the field. And then obviously Evan Engram as well is going to get his. But yeah, I think the combination of, like, I don't really think it's the camp doing that much for me. I think I'm just kind of buying into the hype, just thinking about this offense more from a grand scope. I'll say some of these videos are hilarious. They're like, oh, wow, look at Bijan Robinson burning a linebacker in the middle of the field with no one else out there. It's like,
yeah, I would really
like,
hope so.
Awesome. Like, awesome. Yeah, that situation's going to pose itself. Like, So in general, I don't buy into the hype too much, but I do buy into the hype of some of these players, but not because of the camp hype, though.
Yeah, I think Calvin Ridley is a guy that I am definitely, I'll say it, just falling a little bit in love with, because I was already on the Trevor Lawrence train. I think this is going to be a big breakout year for Trevor Lawrence. This is the year he enters that, at least one tier up of quarterbacks where you've got like Mahomes and we'll talk strictly from a talent perspective. You've got like Mahomes, Herbert, Allen, and then like right after that, talent-wise, because, I mean, Burrow's one of the smartest quarterbacks in the league. I think Lawrence can get right into the Burrow tier with him as far as just, that behind him.
Lawrence is already knocking on the ceiling there to get into that tier heading into this year as it is. So I certainly think he's going to jump up with those guys.
And Calvin Ridley's a guy who's going to come in and immediately, I think, be the number one target. Look, I was skeptical of him at first because I was trying to figure out how exactly the targets are going to be distributed here. You've got Kirk, you've got Engram, you've got Zay Jones. But then I'm like, Calvin Ridley has shown in the years that he's played football. I mean, the last full season he was wide receiver 4 before everything went to shit. He's the best receiver on this team. Like, unless he's washed, which the clips are suggesting he's not, he's still moving at a good speed. Unless he's washed, he's the best receiver on this team, and I think he's going to get his at the expense of Christian Kirk and Evan Engram. Evan Engram is a guy that I've kind of talked myself out of because he last year had, career best 766 yards and I believe it was, 4 touchdowns. So, I mean, he already wasn't scoring a lot. There's room for Calvin to be the guy here, and I just think this offense is going to be high octane, led by Trevor Lawrence, and I think Calvin Ridley is going to be the main beneficiary. So the one thing I will say, as you mentioned, his draft position and it being a little steep, it is rising, and that's not surprising because of the clips and because of us actually seeing him on a football field again. So he is, where is it? ADP of now 43 overall on Fantasy Pros, and that's wide receiver 19. So 43 overall, you are spending a mid fourth round pick on him. I'm okay with that if it stays there. He's wide receiver 19. Again, you have reasonable upside for this guy to finish as a top 10 receiver, and I don't think that's chasing the ceiling too much when he was wide receiver 4 in his last really good season with Matt Ryan. This is Trevor Lawrence now. As long as he stayed in shape, another benefit when they traded for him, like that was an extra several months he had to acclimate to the Jaguars.
Yeah,
like it's one of those things where you get a head start. It's like when players in college basketball take a redshirt year, they come in a semester early and they don't play, but they're just kind of practicing with the team and catching how things work and learning the playbook and all that stuff. I think he's going to hit the ground running, and I am in on Calvin Ridley. Look, if his ADP goes into the 3rd round, I can't really do that. I mean,
I don't know if I'd be comfortable. Like, if you go running back in the first 2 rounds, I don't know if I'd be comfortable with Ridley as my number 1 receiver on my roster.
No,
but I think
I would rather.
I could have him as my. I almost said I can do number 2. I hope we can. But I could.
No constipation here on the Off the Bench podcast.
I would be comfortable with him as my wide receiver 2.
Yeah, and that's where I was at too, Pat, because I mentioned how I've been thinking about taking 2 running backs in my first 2 picks if, it comes around that way where it's guys I like. But then I'm like, I want Calvin Ridley, and he just doesn't look right if you end up with him as your wide receiver 1 in the 3rd round. And so I hope he doesn't rise to that point. But if you get a guy like, say you go running back, and then you get like Chris Olave or something, and then you get Calvin as your 2, I'm okay with that. I can live with that for sure. So Calvin is your 2, and then, hey, maybe you stack on a little Trevor Lawrence there the round after or a couple rounds after. Spoiler alert. Somebody's not going to let me do that in our draft, Pat. I know they're not. So
I've been thinking about multiple other stacks.
I've never been a stack guy. I've never been a stack guy.
I don't think I've ever. I did it, like I said last week, I did it one time like 10 years ago with Calvin Johnson and Matthew Stafford, and they both stunk.
Yeah, I've never been a stat guy, and it's not by intention. It was more of just philosophy of like, I'm not going to force the issue because I don't see the benefit necessary. Like it's fun. Like you can't deny it's fun that you can get so many points on one play if your quarterback throws a touchdown to your receiver. But like, is it mathematically like advantageous to do that? Because again, if that team has a bad week or just gets shut out, like then you have two guys who are attached to the same situation rather than having just one from each, and maybe the other guy from a different team could offset the stack. I don't know. It's a very weird philosophical question, kind of just your preference, but I don't know. With Trevor and Calvin, it just kind of sounds fun. I kind of want to do it, but we'll see if I actually have that opportunity or not. I have no idea how the fuck the quarterbacks are going to go in our league. It's never predictable. Another guy getting a decent amount of camp hype here, James Cook. So currently ADP of 80 overall, RB 30. Look, he's RB 30, and he's getting talked about by offensive coordinator Ken Dorsey as a potential 3-down back in the Bills offense, which we know is going to be fairly high-powered with Josh Allen at the helm. Nyheim Hines is out of the picture because of the Sean Kingston jet ski issue. He joined Sean Kingston. You remember that when Sean Kingston got hit by a jet ski? He got in a bad jet ski accident.
I do not know that.
Yeah, Mr. Beautiful Girl. So
I was going to say, I figured he died when he just saw a beautiful girl.
Yeah, no, Nyheim Hines, much like Sean Kingston, suffering a jet ski accident and is out for the year. Look, this isn't funny, but the fact that he suffered such a football injury because of a jet ski, he tore his ACL in the jet ski accident.
Sitting on a stationary jet ski. Just unfucking believable.
I figured it would at least be like, oh, he straight up broke his leg because he got hit. No, football injury, but on a jet ski. So that begs the question with James Cook. He's going to get, if he wasn't already, going to get most of the receiving work as far as running backs are concerned in this backfield. And as RB30, if he's a 3-down back, that's absolutely of value. Do you believe he's a 3-down back, Pat, or do you think this is kind of coach speak? You do?
I do. I do, just because of the fact that – but the only thing is, this is not really an offense where the 3-down back matters a lot, because Josh Allen is going to take a lot at that goal line. Mm-hmm. And that's the big thing with Cook, is we haven't really seen him get a chance to run between the tackles consistently. But, I mean, like you said, he'll definitely be the main receiving option. And I just don't think Damian Harris is very good. He was in a Patriots system that loved to run the ball. The dude's fine in short yardage situations, but outside of that, I don't see him getting a ton of run. And I always say, I don't like hot takes. Here's a hot take. Maybe he'll get cut. I wouldn't be shocked if we enter the year and Damian Harris isn't there. They also have Latavius Murray, who does seem, despite being older, to have a similar amount in the tank, to be honest. But yeah, I think it's more so just not being worried about Harris that is making me like Cook more and more. And even though the touchdowns may not be there, it's still going to be a good offense. He's still going to have opportunities to score, and he's still going to get some, he'd still get something as the lead back.
Look, James Cook is definitely a name that sticks out to me when you get into that tier of running backs, but I am a little worried about Damian Harris. Just from watching him the past several years, he is a tough little muscle hamster fuck. If Doug Martin didn't monopolize that nickname for, what his career was 3 years long. So
he hated it too. He didn't even like it.
Yeah, he didn't even like it. So kind of unfair that name is just associated with him. But Damian Harris, I think, would have fit that nickname pretty well. He is a tough, grinded out, get those yards runner. And that's not going to lead to him being fantasy relevant, not on a week-to-week basis. But James Cook is not a guy who's ever handled a 3-down workload in his life. And hearing the coach at least say he thinks he's capable of it is good news. I mean, maybe he will get a shot at doing so. I just don't know how much he's going to succeed as a between the tackles runner if he's going to be doing it all the time. And then you've got two guys, Josh Allen and Damian Harris, that on the goal line are better suited for that role than James Cook is. I think James Cook in a PPR league, I could buy him as either an RB2 if you waited really, really long to fill that spot and you have really good receivers. As a flex, I think he's probably an ideal flex in a PPR league. I don't necessarily see the ceiling for James Cook. And maybe I'll eat my words because in this offense, there's definitely room for, production out of these guys, but I just don't see it.
And it goes to say I'm in on him, but Buffalo has never really been a fantastic fantasy backfield, just because of Josh Allen. Obviously, Devin Singletary has been a feasible play the last few years, but it's never been for having such a good offense, it's never a team where it's I want that team's running back. They've just never been like that. So he's RB30, like I said, high end flex, Yeah, I feel like his ceiling might be low-end RB2. But that said, like, I still like him a lot better than Damien. A few months ago, and we kind of started talking about it, I was kind of like, oh, I don't know what to think of the Bills' backfield, but I do tend to think that that's James Cook's backfield with a little bit of Damian Harris, more so than the other way around, or even split.
Yeah, and I don't expect this to look like, the Swift Jamal Williams backfield where it's like, Cook is only getting the receiving work and the not gadget plays, but you know what I mean, get him into open space kind of plays. I don't expect it to look like that at all, but I just think Damian Harris is going to take enough that it's going to be annoying. And yes, it's weird when you look at the contract for a guy like Damian Harris. They could easily cut him, and it's like no penalty to them at all. It's like $1 million dead cap, which to an NFL team is fucking nothing. But I would still be surprised, because then that would leave them with just Latavius Murray, who's 100 years old.
Who's apparently
Darrington
33
Evans
years old.
Is there.
I did not realize that he is 7 years older than Damian Harris. But still, he looked decent. He played for 2 different teams, and he looked decent.
Looks capable until he doesn't, and he may just crumble into dust this year, because he will not go away. He's determined to be the ultimate journeyman running back, I think.
Raiders legend.
He's got Adrian Peterson to compete with for that, so I don't know if he's going to accomplish that. Quentin Johnston, Pat, we'll get into our first rookie here. So Quentin Johnston reportedly has a very special connection with Justin Herbert. Now, similar logic with the Calvin Ridley take, other than the fact that Quentin Johnston's not going to be the Chargers wide receiver 1, obviously, or even their 2. Investing in an offense that I believe in and investing in a quarterback that I believe in. I think Herbert is going to have a massive year as well, get back to who he was, and Quentin Johnston could be along for that ride. Supposedly, he is, based on some of the videos I've seen, seems like he solved one of the main concerns that he had coming out of college, which was that he doesn't catch with his hands. That was the big knock on him scouting-wise, and every clip you see now is him high-pointing the ball and making some ridiculous catches. And it's like, okay, if he's already sorted this out, a few days into camp or over the course of the offseason, then this would be a massive steal for the Chargers. My concern with Quentin Johnston is the obvious one. There's so many fucking weapons on this team.
I was going to say, I think he's like the number 5 target on that team, realistically.
Yeah,
I'd put Gerald Everett ahead of him.
Yeah, it's like you've obviously got the incumbent Keenan Allen and Mike Williams as the receivers. You've got Austin Eckler, who is the most receiving running back of all time, I think. And you've got Gerald Everett as a capable tight end. I wouldn't be surprised if Johnston out-targeted, Gerald Everett. But
sure.
Again, what you're banking on here, if you think Gerald Everett can be a difference maker and a guy who's going to start for your fantasy team, is that the talent and the connection with Herbert is going to be enough for him to basically demand those targets, because logistically on the pecking order, you're right, he's at best 4th. Eckler's a target monster, and Williams and Keenan Allen have just been here for so long that unless one of them gets hurt, which is also not
this could be a whole different conversation. Both of those guys can be off the field, and Johnston's the number 1 wide receiver. Like, that's the thing, is like, that's why I think he's a fair stash, especially best ball. I like him a lot more in best ball, but a great football player. I love it from a football standpoint. It was a good move, but I just don't love it from a fantasy perspective this year. And, to mention Gerald Everett, Kellen Moore loves tight ends. Dalton Schultz, 8 in a Kellen Moore offense. And Gerald Everett's even a bit more athletic than Dalton Schultz is. So I think that could be a problem. I just don't see him getting the volume to where I'm going to take him thinking this is going to be a guy who's going to contribute for me every week. He may be a guy who I might say, hey, it's the 8th round. This is a guy in my bench. Sure, I'll throw a dart at Quentin Johnston easily.
Right, and that is where he's going. His ADP right now is 100 overall. Hopefully it doesn't rise too much because of the camp clips that are coming out. But, Johnston's a guy that you are banking on the talent demanding more targets. And, look, there's a world where Quentin Johnston jumps Mike Williams for the wide receiver 2 role. There is. Mike Williams has been inconsistent as hell over the course of his career. So there's a world where Johnston translates to the NFL really quickly and jumps him for that role and becomes the more reliable player. At the same time, no matter what happens to Mike Williams, he's going to be on the roster and he's still going to have those spike weeks, and those are going to be probably the down weeks for Quentin Johnston.
I fucking love Mike Williams as a football player, not even necessarily fantasy, but the dude is so talented.
He's the jump ball
and it's
god.
Been so frustrating. He was so good last year around the injuries. And, obviously he had some more duds, but obviously, again, the duds for us in a standard league are a lot, harder to handle, but his spike weeks, there were weeks where he was the only guy, out there for Herbert throwing the ball to. I really hope he's a guy that I really hope could stay healthy, because in terms of talent, I think he's it could be possibly an elite receiver, but will his health ever permit that? Who the fuck knows?
And it's like, even when he is healthy, he seems to have these weeks where he just disappears, and it's like inexcusable at that point. There are people willing to tolerate that in their wide receiver 2 or flex spots, depending how their team is built, and I'm just not one of them. So look, if Johnston can be more consistent, like I said, he could take over that role, but that is a bet that that's a gamble that you're taking.
Yeah.
I think if the rest of your bench, or at least some of your other bench spots, are taken up by guys who have clearer paths to playing time, then I'm okay with mixing in Quentin Johnston and hoping that talent rules all. But otherwise, I don't know. These clips are fun, but there's so many pieces on this offense. And Pat, the final one is a guy that you touted as a major bust for this upcoming season, and that is Darren Waller. Waller supposedly has an unstoppable connection with Daniel Jones. So this coming from one of the beat writers, I believe, for SNY, he said Daniel Jones, Darren Waller connection was even better Thursday than it was on Friday. Waller is basically always open in the middle of the field, and Jones is constantly looking for him. This offense hasn't had a weapon like Waller in quite some time, and you can tell everyone's benefiting from it. Jones completed 7 of 9 passes in full team drills. 4 of those completions went to Waller. The 3 that didn't came when Waller was off the field getting a breather. Alternate headline: Brian Daboll removed Waller from the lineup to force Jones to look elsewhere. Fair. Go ahead.
Yeah, and that's the thing, is my biggest concern was just that, not even that there were too many mouths to feed, but it's just that it's a mess. Who knows who was going to emerge? I'm sure, even last week I'm thinking that there will be some Darren Waller games, but will the consistency be there at the ADP? But I guess looking at it from the other perspective is, you could look at it that there's nobody else there. There's a lot of people there, but there's no one of value. So if Jones really leads into Waller, who is by far the most established target, maybe I could be dead wrong, and I would be absolutely. This is a situation, like I said last week, Waller's probably my second favorite player in the whole league. I would be absolutely fine taking the L on this.
Yeah, I mean, he's the most talented receiver of that group. It's a matter of, can he stay healthy, and how is the connection with Jones going to be? Well, the connection with Jones is clearly very strong, because Jones is probably just thrilled to have an above average receiver on this team that he can throw to, well above average when he's fully healthy. So this is a guy that, with smart coaches like the Giants have with Brian Daboll and Mike Kafka as the offensive coordinator, I think they are going to put Waller in spots to succeed. I'm at a point now after these reports where my only concern is Waller's health. And at tight end 7, I might be okay making that investment. I haven't done it yet in any mocks to figure out how the team turns out, but it's a guy, look, his ceiling is tight end 2 behind Travis Kelce. It is. I mean, he's done this kind of production before. It's just been a couple years, and yes, it's a valid question.
And he's also 30 years old. Is the other thing too?
And he will be 31 mid-season, not even mid-season, a couple weeks in.
Being such a late bloomer, people kind of understate his age. That he's a lot older than people think, because he's really only been around for 5-6 years. But
tread on the tires too.
Yeah,
look at it that way.
Yeah. So, but again, I would be very, very happy to be wrong. And at tight end 7, I think it would just depend on where he goes. Is he the tight end 7? Yeah, probably the 7th best option at tight end. But it just depends on where he goes. If he's kind of fading a little bit, then I'd be more inclined to. But if he's going in the 6th round, it's I don't know if I want to invest in a pick on him at that point.
Yeah, ADP right now is 78th overall, which would put him in the 7th?
Early 7th.
My math is terrible again. Yeah, early 7th. So look, at that point, I'm kind of okay with it. I think now you look at the tight ends behind him, and the upside for Waller is probably a lot higher than all those guys. Look,
Absolutely.
Evan Ingram's going to be nowhere near his team's top target. Pat Freiermuth is going to be nowhere near his team's top target. David Njoku will probably be second. Dalton Schultz could be his team's top target, to be honest with you, but Waller's the guy that is head and shoulders above the other guys on his team, and you can't say that about a ton of tight ends. So I'm interested.
That's fair.
We'll put it that way. We'll put it that way. Pat, we teased this last week, the running back deader zone. So we won't spend as much time on this as we did the dead zone last week, but this year, with running backs kind of falling down the draft board, it pushed kind of some of the running backs that you might see in the normal dead zone, the 3rd to 6th round, and it pushed them down even another tier into the 7th round or later for some of these names that are going to have significant workloads, or at least significant enough that you can start them or draft them and stash them, whatever. I'll read off a bunch of these names really quick, and then we'll figure out which ones of them kind of stand out above the rest. But these are guys that you can get in the 7th round or later. You've got Javonte Williams, Alvin Kamara, James Cook, Antonio Gibson, A.J. Dillon, Brian Robinson, Dalvin Cook, Rashad Penny, Khalil Herbert, Samaje Perine, Damian Harris, Jamal Williams, Zach Charbonnet, sorry, it's a lot of names, Elijah Mitchell, Jerick McKinnon, Jeff Wilson, Devon Achane, Devin Singletary, Tyler Algier, Deonta Foreman, Raheem Mostert, and Jalen Warren. So I cut it off there. Jalen Warren being the last one in ADP right now at 138 overall. Javonte Williams kicked it off at 76, so that's at the very start of the 7th round. These are all guys that you can get for either your flex spot or your bench. And when you see names like, I mean, yes, he's coming back from injury, but Javonte Williams, Brian Robinson, who's probably going to be the starting running back on that team. And if he's not, Antonio Gibson's right there as well. James Cook, who we talked about. There are plenty of viable names here. Will they all be super productive backs? Obviously not. Most of them probably won't be, but I think there's better dart throws here than there have been in the past. Pat,
Agreed.
which name or names stick out to you the most in terms of guys that you would draft either as, we'll call it a flex starter or a high upside stash or anything else?
See, that's the thing. I don't know how comfortable I would necessarily be flexing any of these guys. I think taking these guys would be a situation if you completely punt the position of running back and you really, really wait on it. I think there are some guys that I'm a little bit comfortable going in an RB2. I mean, I think the most interesting backfield is the Broncos. Another guy who's been getting a ton of hype is Javonte Williams. He has not had any limitations.
Yeah.
And he's looked good. But the thing is, they're not going to risk that. I don't think they're going to get him back too soon. I think he's going under no limitations now, kind of just to see if he can actually do it. But I still don't think he's going to see the start of the year, and obviously that's going to open the door for Samaje Perine to be productive at the beginning of the year. Last year, similar, there were a few, like Clyde Edwards. We had a guy in our league punt running back, and like his first 2 running backs were like CEH and Antonio Gibson. And the guy looked like a genius the first 3 weeks, and then those guys sucked the rest of the season. Yeah. So, like, I can easily see Samaje Perine being one of those guys who has a really good start to the year and then kind of fades out. But I like Perine a little better there because, again, Sean Payton has shown time and time again he likes 2 running backs. He likes, having a passing down running back as well. And Samaje Perine, despite being on the older side of the running back scale, he's a guy who's been a solid receiver in Cincinnati, and he could have standalone value even if Williams is back. But, like, I love Williams as a stash, especially in, like, best ball. Especially in best ball, because this is a guy, if he misses a couple weeks, he could come back and pick up where he left off. And we saw a lot of good stuff about him. So if I had to take any of these guys, granted it's going to of course it's a cop out. He's the highest ranked guy here, but if I have to pick anybody of these guys that I'm going to put in my starting lineup tomorrow, it is Javonte Williams. Assuming he's healthy.
Yeah, I think there's a decent amount of guys that in a 12-team league, they're at least a feasible flex. I mean, look, if Alvin Kamara doesn't get suspended, obviously, I mean, he could destroy his ADP if he's not suspended.
Even if he's suspended for 2 games, he could destroy his
true.
ADP.
I mean, if it's 2 games, I think you live with a guy that you picked in the 7th round being, probably providing you RB2 value at the very least. I mean, he may have lost a step, but that doesn't mean that step is going to take him all the way, 15, 20 spots below where he's ever finished in fantasy.
Exactly.
So.
And the thing, too, is that we'll probably know where, how many games he's going to miss. So if he's suspended, that could scare people even further. This could be a guy going in the 8th, 9th round. We're talking about, a borderline fantasy MVP at his peak. Like, obviously, he's not at his peak, but, and again, last year he was very inconsistent, but still had some signs of production. Again, with getting the clarity on his situation is the way it is. And I think another kind of theme here is just that, like, most of these guys are going to have a role. The only true, like, handcuff exclusive guys that you've listed here are Tyler Algier and Jalen Warren. Like, I'm only drafting those guys saying, like, okay, these guys are going to be good if there is an injury. But all these other guys are going to have, value on its own. I guess it depends on who emerges in Chicago and who the fuck emerges in Miami. Like, I've been a big Khalil Herbert fan the last few years. I remember getting into an argument with a guy on another team at a slow-pitch softball game because I said I thought he was better than David Montgomery. And the guy, like, adamantly disagreed with me.
Not a crazy take at all, obviously. I think that's probably the popular take now.
And I mean, Deonta Foreman's okay. He's okay. I mean, he ran real well in Carolina, but Herbert's younger, and he's got a... And I think if I have to pick a Miami running back, it's Devon Achane. Just because of the health of Mostert and Wilson, and just that those guys are just very low ceiling guys. They're kind of steady as they go, but they don't inspire anything out of me. But A-Chain is, A-Chain's exciting. He's a better pass catcher. Not like he's going to be some crazy pass catcher in that offense, but if I had to go with anyone, I think A-Chain's a really good dart throw as late as he's going, as is Khalil Herbert.
I think this group of backs is kind of just a goodie bag of whatever you want at that point in your draft. I mean, look, you're going to start filling out your bench and maybe your flex spot at this point, 7th round or later. But I find myself taking 3 or 4 straight running backs when we hit these rounds because it's the hardest position to find guys who are consistently productive, and this year provides better dart throws than any other year. I mean, look, you've got, like you said, Khalil Herbert, James Cook. These are guys who are projected starters and potentially handling the vast majority of touches in their backfield, and you can get them this late. And then you've got guys who are incredibly high ceiling backs like Devon Achane, I wouldn't say Jerick McKinnon has incredibly high upside, but he's still a guy that is going at the back end of even this group of running backs and
I think
can provide a lot of value.
Obviously not a crazy high upside, but we're talking about a very prominent player in the Kansas City offense. You can't understate that.
Yeah, I mean, the guy ended last year on an absolute tear. I mean, I don't think people realize he was, let's see, where is he? He was up there in terms of total receiving touchdowns last year.
The last 5-6 weeks he was insane.
Yeah, it's just very funny to see. Oh, here he is. Oh, yeah, sorry. Jerick McKinnon was tied for 6th in receiving touchdowns last year with 9. Tied for 6th in the league. He was only behind Devontae Adams, Travis Kelce, Stephon Diggs, George Kittle, and A.J. Brown. Then you've got Jerick McKinnon. I was listening to the Fantasy Footballers podcast the other day, and they made a really good point. It was they kind of let Jerick McKinnon go for a little bit, and one of the guys on there suggested that maybe they wanted Jahmyr Gibbs, and as soon as they missed out, they were like, all right, we're going to bring McKinnon back. So their hesitancy to bring McKinnon back, or I guess their delay in bringing McKinnon back, is not indicative, I don't think, of how they plan to use him this year. It's just they needed somebody to fill that role, and he ended up being the guy that they had to take to fill it. And he was damn good in it last year.
Well, the one thing you do want to pump the brakes on, though, is that before last season, he had 7 career receiving touchdowns. So you don't want to, obviously there's going to be some regression. That guy's not going to catch 9 touchdowns next year.
Probably not. No.
Kind of connected to McKinnon is people think obviously this year's Jerick McKinnon could be Antonio Gibson. Obviously with Eric Bieniemy moving over to Washington, it's going to be his offense. And granted, I think the whole Andy Reid thing got very overhyped in Kansas City about saying it's Andy Reid's offense. Andy Reid went on the record saying multiple times no, this is Eric Bieniemy's offense. And I think we're going to see that in Washington. He's at least going to try and implement a similar thing. Obviously, you don't have fucking Patrick Mahomes and Travis Kelce to do that. But what they
Sam Howell and Logan Thomas. Same thing.
What they do have is a really good receiving back who obviously was a literal wide receiver in college. I almost said high school. I'm sure he was too. But a literal wide receiver in college who's shown good receiving. And again, one injury to Brian Robinson, and we're looking at a 3rd down back. I think that kind of sums up a lot of the situations, is that all of these guys are one injury away from being weekly starters. And when you're taking them that late in the draft with some standalone value without that, why not? Why wouldn't you? I would rather do that than some receiver who's this guy's the number 3 receiver on this team behind 2 good players. Here's to hoping. I think that's way more of a dart throw than running back, which is such a fluid position as the year goes on.
Yeah, I'll give you 3 names in here that, if for whatever reason in the 7th round or later you're looking for a starter for your fantasy team. And I'll take off, the top 3 guys, Javonte, Kamara, and Cook, just so we can dig a little bit deeper. If you for some reason are that desperate for another starting back and you don't want to hate yourself, I really think guys I'll give you Jerick McKinnon, Elijah Mitchell, and Khalil Herbert. I think all 3 of those guys can occupy a flex spot in week 1 and give you at least a decent chance at a solid amount of points. And the fact that I can confidently say that, those guys are all ranked. The highest one I said was Khalil Herbert, whose ADP is 95th right now. These guys are basically outside the top 100, and they have clear, defined roles in these backfields. Just like we've said it a million times, Pat, more value than ever being pushed further and further down the board at the running back position.
And there is one more guy
to take receivers early.
There is one more guy that we haven't really talked about a lot this offseason, and last week was A.J. Dillon. He was a guy that had a ton of hype last year because the whole thought was going to be, oh, Aaron Jones is just going to basically be a receiver, and then A.J. Dillon's going to be the lead running back basically and get a ton of opportunities. And then the first 10 weeks of the season, it was like, what the fuck? And it was a complete whiff until he started getting all the goal line carries at the end of the season. I traded for Aaron Jones and A.J. Dillon at that point in the season, and being a Jones owner in a non-PPR league was so frustrating as A.J. Dillon was getting all the touchdowns. And a lot of this depends on Jordan Love. We don't know how good Jordan Love's going to be. This offense may not be nearly as good, may not provide as many red zone opportunities as it did with Aaron Rodgers. But I think there's still a good possibility that this is, at the very least, a passable offense. And A.J. Dillon is someone clearly that Matt LaFleur is probably more confident in than Aaron Jones at the goal line. So I think that's another just clearly defined role. Again, not a guy that I would love to throw into my starting lineup, but a guy that you're picking knowing that there's a strong possibility. And then if Aaron Jones is out,
Yeah. A lot of good backs here. Pick your poison with what you want at that point in the draft. Again, you want to take your stab at, upside. Go with a guy like Devon Achane. Go with a guy like even Jalen Warren. There's a non-zero chance he takes over Najee Harris, or at least if Najee gets hurt, there's a possibility there. And he's pick 138. There's been a lot of, positive reports coming for Jalen Warren in camp, and honestly even before camp. So yeah, just a lot of good backs in this range, and I think more incentive to take a guy like Travis Kelce in the first round if you want, or just go super crazy receiver heavy, or go out and get yourself Patrick Mahomes and not have to think about the quarterback position all year. It's a strategy that I understand. It's just, obviously you have to take the time during the year to actually evaluate which of the 7 running backs you drafted are actually good and then get the right ones in the starting lineup. But by the time you do that, hopefully your receivers have held down the fort for that, maybe 2 weeks or so before you figure out who's getting the most touches. But you may have a lot of really productive, or at least getting a lot of high touch backs here on your bench if you take a bunch in this range, and I think it's worth doing so.
Yeah, again, and even if you go running back in the first few rounds, it's still fair to throw darts at this point because
definitely.
One of these guys emerges, you've either got 3 solid running backs or you've got huge trade bait. And you don't even necessarily have to trade one of these guys. If you take, I don't know, fucking Kenneth Walker or, Travis Etienne, you could trade one of those guys and get even more value, and you've done that because you've gone hunting for a guy with, a lower floor but still a reasonable ceiling.
Yeah, if they hit that ceiling or at least get close to it, then you can trade your stud, get a stud back at a different position, and then just start Khalil Herbert, who's on pace for 1,000 yards or whatever ends up happening throughout the season. Who knows? Some deep sleepers I wanted to throw at everybody. Also running backs, guys that I've kind of not fallen in love with, but are kind of ideal, either last round picks or second to last round picks. Kene Nwangwu, I don't even know if I'm pronouncing that right. It's the Vikings backup, technically. Sean Tucker, Chase Brown, and Devon Achane, who we just talked about a little bit. Nwangwu, and I'm going to try and stop saying his name so much because I don't know if I'm saying it right. He is, as of right now, seems like he's going to be Alexander Madison's backup. We've spent some time talking about Dwayne McBride and Ty Chandler being, both rookies coming in, but Nwangwu's been a special teamer on this team for a while.
And a great special teamer at that.
Great special teamer coming out of Iowa State a couple years ago, and his athleticism score, Pat, I don't know what exact metric this was, which athleticism score it was, but it was comparable to Breece Hall, who is a guy that people are talking about is comparable to Adrian Peterson in terms of he should be able to recover from this ACL thing because of how athletic he is and blah, blah, blah. Look, being athletic is not the be all end all, obviously, but I think Nwangwu's a guy who's being slept on because our question about Alexander Madison has been how good at football is this guy? And if a few weeks in we find out he's not Kene Nwangwu could be a guy who actually takes this backfield over. Now, don't get me wrong. What I'm saying is like a 1-2% maybe max chance of happening, but these are the long toss deep sleepers that you want to be on the lookout for. There's a non-zero chance that Kene Nwangwu ends up being the starter for the Vikings in a very high-powered offense. Sean Tucker, similar logic, obviously not a high-powered offense, but just we don't know how good Rachaad White is. So Sean Tucker is a rookie who slipped in the NFL draft due to health concerns, so he's a guy to keep an eye on as well. This could end up being his backfield if Rachaad White doesn't prove anything. It's unlikely that Rachaad White wouldn't at least be the receiving back in that situation, and then, you might have a guy in Sean Tucker who's just an early down back and a not that good offense. But again, we're talking like we know exactly how these offenses are going to look during the season. And let's be honest, the Bucs could be passable. The Bucs could pull a Seahawks like last year. We don't know what's going to happen.
I was watching a video where it was like, who could be this year's Seahawks? And they said the Bucs.
Yeah, it's a team that everybody's writing off and has a quarterback that we all think we know is not good. But again, Baker's shown
even
these
as
flashes.
not good as Baker Mayfield is, though, I think he's looked upon more fondly than Geno Smith was, and look what Geno Smith
Absolutely. Did. Yeah, so you never know. And Kyle Trask is a complete unknown. Maybe he's good. I don't know. Don't let that one, again, training camp or like mini camp clip from way back where Baker completely missed his tight end. Like, don't let that cherry-picked clip make you think he's just god-awful. Maybe he is god-awful, but that clip's not wise. So, we never know how these offenses are going to play out, and when you have a guy with a potential path to a role, it's just interesting to keep an eye on. Chase Brown is another one I have, rookie on the Bengals. Joe Mixon, obviously his contract got restructured, but just a guy that Samaje Perine was taking a lot of touches last year, and I don't know that with Joe Mixon's waning efficiency that they're going to give him more touches just because Perine's gone. I think somebody's going to fill that role, and if Brown proves that he has more juice in the tank than Mixon does, this could become more of a split than we expect. And then if Mixon goes down, you've got the starting running back on the Cincinnati Bengals. That's not a bad thing to have. And then Devon Achane, a guy that I had kind of written off a little because of all the Dalvin Cook rumors. And then once the dust settled there, where it doesn't seem like Cook's going to Miami anymore, watch him sign there tomorrow, Devon Achane becomes the most interesting back in this backfield because he is the youngest one. He is a speed threat, much like Raheem Mostert is, but 7 years younger. So
12.
It's a guy that it may take some time for him to emerge in this backfield, but eventually you could have the most talented running back on, again, another high-powered, very speedy offense of the Miami Dolphins in Devon Achane. So just some deeper sleepers that I think you can get pretty late. Devon Achane, not quite as late as some of these other guys, but keep an eye on them because I think we have a tendency, the fantasy community at this point in the year, to act like we know everything and we know how depth charts are going to shake out and we know what roles everybody's going to have. We don't. We need to look at the backfields where there's guys that we are uncertain on their talent level and we haven't seen them produce at all, maybe ever. Yeah. And that's kind of what we're doing with Rachaad White and Alexander Mattison. And Joe Mixon has in the past, but it's waning. You got to identify those situations where it seems like a sure thing and it's just not. You have to realize.
And similarly, one of the guys I think is Kendre Miller in New Orleans, just from the perspective of we don't know what's going to happen with Alvin Kamara. And like I said, he declined a bit last year. I hope that it stops declining, but it very well could keep going. Jamal Williams with all the big deal about his the huge touchdowns last year. But if Kamara is suspended, Kendre Miller is going to fall right into that pass-catching back role. Again, the Saints have made it clear that whether with Sean Payton or under Dennis Allen, that they like using two running backs. They like kind of having a guy for pass-catching. So I like him. Yeah. Another guy who honestly could be involved regardless is Jerome Ford in Cleveland. We've never seen Nick Chubb really be the predominant pass catcher. Because Kareem Hunt has been there the last few years, and he's so good in that aspect. But granted, I hope it's all Nick Chubb, because if Nick Chubb gets, is catching a lot of passes this year, then he's a dynamite pick. But if they do want someone else to supplant him, I think that that Jerome Ford's the guy. And a lot of these guys that we've talked about are younger. I'm going to go with a veteran here, and it's Gus Edwards. Again, this is a pure handcuff pick. A pure handcuff pick. He is going to get some play in short yardage situations and at the goal line. And again, this is going to be a good offense. But again, J.K. Dobbins is on PUP right now. Obviously he's had a pretty
still don't know exactly why.
Exactly. And he's had a pretty significant injury history. And even with Todd Monken, they're going to throw the ball more, but they are still going to be a running offense. And they've made it clear in the past that when Gus Edwards is the top guy on the depth chart, they're not afraid to use him. Mm-hmm. So whether it's even at the beginning of the year, if there's something going wrong with J.K. Dobbins, or if J.K. Dobbins missed games, Gus Edwards is a guy that you'd be able to, at least from what we've seen in the past, he's a guy you're going to be able to put into your lineup right away. But again, this late, you're just looking for lottery tickets, and a lot of times lottery tickets happen because of injuries. Obviously, you don't want to kind of predict injuries or root for injury or whatnot, but you've got to look at which situations might pose that the most. And I feel like, with J.K. Dobbins and Gus Edwards, I love J.K. Dobbins, by the way, Grant, assuming he stays healthy. I've been consistent on that. But like I said, I think if Edwards fell into that position, he'd be productive.
Yeah, so plenty of deep sleepers to consider as you get into your drafts, guys that your league mates may not be thinking at all about, and then you can look like a genius because you kind of thought a little deeper about backfields that there's not as much certainty as people would like you to believe. Honestly, Pat, I feel like people have been talking about, is Alexander Mattison cut out for the role? Is Rachaad White cut out for the role? But then they don't take that next step to be like, what if there's somebody behind them that is cut out for the role? There's a chance that there isn't. Like, there's a chance that the Vikings running back room is filled with mediocre guys who who aren't up to the task. There's a chance that the Bucs running back room is filled with mediocre guys who aren't up to the task. But
they are.
I personally think, it's fun. I think it's fun to try and find these guys who we don't know much about and have a potential path if their starter ends up sucking. And they might. Yeah. So you never know. We'll close it out with our viewer questions. First question here. How much, if at all, do you take bye weeks into account while drafting? Pat, I'm sure, I figured your answer would be 0. The answer should be 0. Draft your best team possible.
Unless the only thing, a lot of leagues nowadays do the 3-week playoffs. They'll do, 6 teams make it, 1-week matchups. Brandon and I are in a league where it's 4 teams make the playoffs and it's 2-week matchups. So if, our first round of the playoffs is week 14 and there are buys in week 14.
Yes.
So that is the only thing I think about is week 14. Is if there's a guy, if I'm debating between 2 guys really tight and one of them has a week 14 bye, I may think about it the other way. But besides that, I do not care. I don't care if every starter on my team has a bye week 7. I'm going to lose week 7. That's okay, but that means I'm good the rest of the year. If I've got my full team the rest of the year, while, someone might be missing 1 or 2 guys, that's an advantage. I would rather take a hard L 1 week and, be better off. But again, I also don't try to stack my bye weeks. Be like, let me do this strategy and only lose 2 games. But I used to, when we started playing, I used to write down which teams are on bye what week to kind of avoid that. But now I just don't care at all outside of the week 14 possibility.
I think people that focus on bye weeks vastly underestimate how different their roster is gonna or should look by week 6 or 7, where it's like I could draft my starting receivers who, both or all 3 have bye week 7, and then, oh God, all my bench receivers have bye week 7 as well. You're probably going to drop 2 of those guys. You might trade one of them, all this stuff. Draft the best team you possibly can, because that's the priority. If you start letting bye weeks get in the way of you drafting what you think is the best team, you're going to have a bad time. I do agree with the week 14 thing. Even that, I think logically you should ignore it, because your goal is to build your best team, and then you can move and shake after that to get into a good spot.
And if you're in the playoffs, you should have a guy on the bench that you should be able to slide into that position. Right.
You would think your team is deep enough that you can survive that. So, and I will say, Pat, the one nice thing is the teams on bye week 14 are pretty bad this year. So it's the Arizona Cardinals and the Washington Commanders. Yes, they each have relevant fantasy players, but not many. I mean, you're looking at Hollywood Brown, James Conner, Terry McLaurin, Jahan Dotson, Antonio Gibson, and none of those guys are really going to be. None of those guys are anything more than a 2.
I was going to say, when Hollywood Brown is the best guy. I mean, potentially Kyler Murray at that point in the year as well could be. But that's actually refreshing to hear. It's I said, I hadn't even looked at that because I don't care. But that's nice to hear.
It could be a lot worse. It's better than a team like the 49ers or the Chiefs being on bye week 14, where it's super relevant players. Honestly, the players that I just listed, even if you did draft them and you're missing them week 14, again, you can live with that.
Exactly.
At least they're probably not going to be these superstar fantasy players. Next up, if you miss out on one of the top tight ends, Kelsey/Andrews, they're in different tiers, but I get what you mean. If you miss out on one of the top tight ends, how early are you taking another tight end, and who? Pat and I have been pretty consistent. I think that we're waiting. We're kind of waiting pretty late, right? I mean, I'm looking at. Basically, if I don't get one of the top tight ends, which I never do because I just don't draft that way, I am wholly uninterested in the tier of tight ends from 2 through, I guess, 6. I've talked myself into Waller a little bit, as we know from earlier in the show, but guys like Hawkinson and Kittle and Goddard, I don't find myself drafting very often. I would rather wait and get guys who can have, honestly, probably slightly higher target shares than a lot of those guys. A guy like Greg Dulcich, at least at the ceiling, could have a higher target total than those guys. Greg Dulcich, Dalton Kincaid, Chig Okonkwo, I think they're all interesting late-round flyer tight ends. I've just always been a guy that waits on tight ends. I wait, I draft 2, I hope one of them hits, and if they don't, oh well, I'm down bad at tight end like half the rest of the league is, and I keep trying to cycle through free agents and find one.
Even from the perspective of if I miss Kelsey, I probably wouldn't take Andrews based on the ADP, but I would take George Kittle at his ADP, which is 61, so that's the first pick of the 6th round. That's something I'd be willing to do, but I'm not huge in on Hawkinson, and then I'm just not huge on that next group of guys, Goddard, Waller, Ingram. I'm just not crazy on them to begin with. So either I'm going to get Kelsey or Kittle, or I'm going to go to that tier of Freiermuth, Njoku, Schultz, Kincaid, whatever.
Goddard is like solid as they come, but it's just not like a pick you feel excited
And in a
about.
standard league, that doesn't work a ton. You got to catch touchdowns.
We need those touchdown guys, and Goddard hasn't.
PPR Goddard's a much more viable pick, I think, at that point. Obviously,
Yes.
these ADPs are reflective of full point PPR.
Right, absolutely. And finally, non-Kyle Pitts, who was your biggest miss in fantasy football previously? Pat, I'm curious to hear yours. I know what mine was, and it's still my biggest miss. It's just I didn't have a platform when this one happened. It was Eddie Lacy in 2015. I took Eddie
Buffet
Lacy.
King.
Yeah, so I went back actually, and I thought I took Eddie Lacy first overall. I realized he was basically the pseudo first overall pick because Gary picked ahead of me and took Aaron Rodgers, which was heinous even then.
And he won the league, didn't he?
I think he won the year before because he had all the Packers. He had Lacy when he was good, and he had Rodgers, and I think it was Randall Cobb on his pack stack team of all his Packer fans. So of course he managed to make that work. But yeah, Eddie Lacy I took as the first real player off the board, coming off of 2 pretty good years, 1,000+ yards, 9+ touchdowns each of those years. I went into it like, okay, starting running back, basically no competition on an Aaron Rodgers led offense. What could go like 2 years of sample size too to go off of and be like he's going to be good? He got fat. That's basically what happened. He got fat and sucked. And I was like, are you fucking kidding me? I looked at this guy. That was one of the first years where I really did like a lot of research for fantasy football. And I was like, this is the safest back on the board. He's going to get all the touches on a really good offense. And he's shown that he is a good player. And he ate too much. So that's the only, the Kyle Pitts one was a 3rd round pick. And that sucks. But this was my first overall pick. And I think it's the only other year I ever finished with a losing record. So yeah, that one sucks.
I'm gonna go way back because none are coming to mind in terms of my first round picks. Like I've had some dud first round picks where it's just like they weren't. But the one guy I whiffed on, I think this is probably like 2010 or 11. Beanie Wells on the Cardinals, a guy who I considered for our random running back draft, but I thought was a little too relevant. But that year on the Cardinals, I think he had like 1,000 yards the year before, and I took him I think in the first round. This was like the second year I ever played fantasy football, and the dude just fucking sucked, and my team fucking sucked. And then the guy vanished from the league as quick as he entered it. So Beanie, we got beef.
Beanie had, I think, 1,000-yard year. I think I actually used him on the football immaculate grid at some point during this week. I think there was a Cardinals 1,000-yard rusher.
Oh yes, there
was. And I used Beanie Wells on that. So. Yeah, that's a good one.
I used
as
Edgerrin
well.
James for that.
Wow. Okay. Yeah. I actually didn't even fill mine fully out today. I got through 4 squares. But I really good percentages today so far.
I actually flubbed one today, I believe.
Really?
My best of the week, it was like Bills 3,000 yards, and I put J.P. Losman.
Oh my god.
And he was like 0.1%. Yeah, I missed 2 today somehow. I only have one. I only have one entered right now. The Broncos 1,000-yard rusher. I went. Do you have that one?
Broncos 1,000. I do.
I went no Sean Moreno.
I went C.J. Anderson and got 6%.
Fat.
Talking about fat guys, I'm going back through my screenshots and seeing if I got good percentages. Oh yeah. So there was a Patriots row earlier this week, and I got a 1% and a 0.4% on this one. So the Patriot Jaguar I got. You'd think I'd go Fred Taylor, right? I went Jonas Gray and got 1%. And then Patriots first team AP All-Pro. Endless options. How about Matt Light at 0.4%?
Yeah.
So
I had a really funny one too.
Highlight.
I don't think it was on Immaculate Grid. There's like another one where it's like crossover grid, which is the same thing,
yes.
but it was Patriots Steelers, and I put Zoltan Mesko.
Wow, that's a good one. I would have thought Gunnar Olszewski.
It took me forever to remember because I'm like, I know they had a punter. I'm like, one of their punters went from the Patriots that the fans loved, and then he wasn't that good, and then he was out of the league. And it took me forever to remember who it was. So that's probably that might be the deepest cut I've had in any Immaculate Grid: baseball, football, basketball, anything.
I would have thought Gunnar Olszewski, and that probably would have been a surprising 11% because he's a skill player. So, yeah. I will say the deepest cut I got today that I was surprised at was Chicago Bears 1,000-yard rusher, 5%. Justin Fields. I put Justin Fields.
Oh, see, that was one I got wrong.
Quarterbacks.
I put Marion Barber. Apparently, it never happened. Did he die?
The obvious
did
one
he
to play.
die?
Yes, he did.
Yeah, rest
He
in
did
peace,
earlier
Marion
this year.
Barber. Yeah.
Yes, R.I.P. Yeah, I think people are just not thinking quarterbacks when they put this. I mean, the obvious one is Matt Forte is probably 75%.
See, yeah, that's what I didn't want to do. Yeah,
But,
that's
I
what
was
I
like-
did. You know what?
I was like, it's gotta be
Fuck this.
someone
I'll
else.
put him in right now. See what he got.
Okay. Let's see what the percentage is for Forte. I'm guessing 65.
31.
31?
Oh, Walter Payton. Walter Payton and Gale
Oh,
Sayers
yeah.
probably took a
Okay.
lot of that too.
Yeah, I guess there are some older heads that's the first guy
I got
that comes to
another one
mind.
wrong. I can't remember who it was. I think it was someone funny. I think it was like Danny Shelton. I thought he
I
was
guess
on the.
Danny
I thought
Shelton
he
for
played on the
something.
Eagles at some point. He didn't.
Oh no, I didn't.
There's
yeah, I
someone
didn't
that
guess him
went
for
from like
this.
Browns to Eagles. That I
Yeah,
I
I was racking my brain trying to think of that too, and I could not earlier today. So I will try and slave that away and maybe update you guys next week. Honestly,
It's not
probably
Danny
'cause we're
Shelton,
gonna be
though.
a week old, but it's not Danny Shelton. Thank you. I'm cheating by taking that advice. Guys, thank you for tuning in this week. Just want to remind you, if you are watching on YouTube, we are on Spotify, Apple, every other podcast platform. If you don't want to look at our dumb faces while we talk, so appreciate the support here on YouTube as well, though, because we just got over 1,000 subscribers this week, which
Thank
is
you.
awesome. The road to 100K, the long road for the second YouTube plaque that will have both our names on it rather than just mine. That is underway. So we just got to 100x this. So share it with your friends. And again, Spotify, Apple, whatever podcast platform you listen to, Off the Bench with Benchwarmer Brand, just search it. Should come up, and both of our faces will be on that thumbnail. But that's all I've got for this week. Pat, you got anything else?
no questions about anyone's moms this week, so I don't really have
Mom
anything else to add.
questions. Yeah, no, you don't get to go off the air with a bang this week like you did last time. You're stop stealing the fucking spotlight. All right, for Pat Gustafson, I am Brandon Carney. He's not allowed to speak anymore. We will see you guys next week.
Bye bye.